viewers again today to the interview of Pipers'Persuasion of today's interviewee on the 14th of March 2012 of Bruce Hitchins, formerly of British Army. Bruce has lots of interesting tales to tell, but as usual, chronologically, we're going to go back to the beginning, Bruce. So I understand that you were born in New Zealand. Is that correct?
Yes, Alan. So, so from New Zealand and proud of it, although a long time ago, some people, or a lot of people get confused with the accent. Although most Scots pick up straight away that it's not a Scottish accent, but it's certainly not a New Zealand accent either. But that's really down to the fact that I've been here a lot longer than I've been in New Zealand. And in particular, when I joined the army, I didn't understand them, they didn't understand me, and I'm sure they weren't going to change, so it was me. But going back to New Zealand, I was...
Whereabouts were you born?
Well, I was born in a small place called Hunterville, actually, which is right in the centre of the North Island.
Do you know that, Graham?
No, probably passed it by, mind you.
Graham was there a couple of years ago. Graham's on camera, folks, in case you're wondering who Graham is.
Right.
That's my brother. And I said, you'll be able to direct Bruce through New Zealand. You know? Okay,
Hunterville, well, you drive through Hunterville on the way from Auckland down to Wellington.
Okay.
So I was born there. It's a very small place. But we soon after that shifted to Pipers'Persuasion North. So I spent most of my childhood in Pipers'Persuasion North, which is about 100 miles north of Wellington.
Okay.
And there wasn't piping directly. I played my great-grandfather's MacDougall bagpipes, which he brought in the 1880s, and I've been in the family ever since. He was quite a player. My grandfather played a bit, but not to a great extent. And this was on my mother's side. So there was no real piping in the family.
What was his name?
My grandfather was Donald Cooper, or Donald Gunn Cooper. His parents.
Where did he pick up his piping from?
Well, his father was Guns from Caithness. So,
right, okay.
And we still have relations up in Caithness, you know.
Aye.
So that's where the family came from originally, on my mother's side.
Did the pipes come across?
Yes, he brought the pipes in Scotland and took them out when he immigrated up to New Zealand. So,
okay.
So that's how the pipes ended up. Like many other old sets of pipes in New Zealand, New Zealand's awash with old pipes.
Aye, that's terrific. So when did they move out to New Zealand? Do you have any idea?
Well, yes, the late 1880s, because he was actually in the Boer War with those pipes, but with the New Zealand regiment. And then he came back for a coronation in, it must have been 1905, so it must have been, well, I don't think it was after Queen Victoria's Day, it was probably when King James V came to the crown.
No, King George V.
I'm getting mixed up, of course, King George V.
King George V,
yeah, great pipe tune, but yes, so yeah, King George, so it must have been that coronation, and there's actually in the house a leave pass that he obtained. He was still in the military then, they obtained a leave pass to go up to Caithness.
Okay.
And it's actually to Helmsdale, so he obviously would have got picked up at Helmsdale in those days, you know.
Yeah.
So that's sort of his background.
So, and took the pipes out to New Zealand. Did your father play?
No, this is all on my mother's side.
Okay.
So my mother, when I was young, very young, 5, 6, the local pipe band used to practice at a football park along, in fact a rugby park when we say football, rugby along from us, particularly on Sunday mornings, because New Zealand in those days used to do this whole drill display marching thing.
Yeah.
So Sunday mornings were always taken up marching around rugby parks, and I was always taken along to hear the band, but I was interested, and about the age of 8, 9, started going to the band practice, picked up the chanter.
What was the name of the band?
Well, actually the very first band I played with was called City of Pipers'Persuasion North, which was a breakaway band from Manawatu Scottish. So I only played with, in fact I never played with, well I did play with City of Pipers'Persuasion North for a very short time. They folded, and then I joined Manawatu Scottish, so really my first band was Manawatu Scottish.
And they played very well at the Worlds last year, didn't they?
Yeah, so they, big change. In those days they were a grade 2 band, but obviously today everybody's heard of them because they're doing good stuff in grade 1.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
So that was the first band I really played with and I competed with was Manor 2, but the first guy that taught me was a guy called Grant Ogilvie, and he got me on the practice track, and he was a stickler for, I think like a lot of teachers, he was a stickler for the technique.
Right.
And I remember going one day, not practicing, and I played for about 2 minutes, and he said, "You haven't practiced, have you?" And I said, "Not much." And he said, "Well, go home." That was the end of that.
Aye, absolutely. This isn't a practice session, eh?
So I made sure I practiced before I went back.
Good, excellent.
But I practiced, and he was very good, so he took me right through the green tutor. And I had to learn the exercises, the green tutor, and all the tunes in the green
Say the
tutor.
green tutor, was that Seaforth?
No, sorry, the College of Piping.
College of Piping.
Yeah, College of Piping is the
Right,
green book.
yeah.
And took me right through that before I got pipes. And I never had my family pipes. I got a second-hand set of pipes, an old set of pipes. And so that's really where I started. And he was a member of the Manor Scottish Pipe Band. And Lou McKinnon, Frank McKinnon's brother, was the pipe major at that time. And I went with them in 1972 to Auckland to the New Zealand Championships. And we won grade 2. And by this stage I was about 16, 17. And I was winning prizes in the solo grades, you know. And they have grading competitions there, so I'd sort of gone through the solo competitions and won different prizes. And I was an apprentice cabinet maker of the old school, learning properly joining the wood and actually working in a workshop making furniture, not just assembling it.
Yeah.
And but Manor 2, in those days, to go from grade 2 to grade 1, you had to have 12 pipers. And Manor 2 only had 8 pipers and couldn't compete in 73. So I decided to shift to Wellington. And the City of Wellington Pipe Band at that time was the big band in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And they were planning to come over to Scotland in 75. So I transferred my apprenticeship and went down to Wellington and lived with an auntie of mine down there. Carried on the apprenticeship and joined the City of Wellington. And really that's probably where my piping took off, because I came in underneath Frank McKinnon. And Frank helped me a lot with the piping and had philosophies on the world and competitions and so forth.
Yeah. What was Frank's background?
Well, Frank's father, Lou McKinnon, had come from Stornoway originally, from Lewis.
Okay.
And they had a short time in Australia, but then the family shifted to Wellington. And his father, I believe, started a wharfs band, a harbour band to start with, the wharf workers. A lot of expats, a lot of Scottish, Irish people on the wharfs. And from there, the City of Wellington was born. So Frank's father, Lou McKinnon, taught a lot of people, and then Frank and Lou, his brother, they were big names in New Zealand as well. Frank unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but he was a big influence in the New Zealand piping scene.
Now, when you're saying that, obviously you're playing light music, did you have any pibroch at that time?
I remember going up north, and Angus Macaulay, who was a very famous New Zealand piper, who shifted up, well, Scottish piper, who shifted to New Zealand. And I was probably 17 or something, and he said, "Why aren't you playing pibroch?"
Aye.
And I said, "Well, I'm not good enough." And he said, "Rubbish boy, you know."
Aye,
So start playing pibroch. So I started to learn some, but nothing serious really in New Zealand at that stage. So mainly playing with the band and playing light music and competing in light music competitions.
Okay. So, is there anything else about New Zealand you'd like to say?
Well, it was a good, well, what happened then was in 75, City of Wellington came over. In 74 we went to Australia and won the Australian Championships. And I think I won the B grade competition, piping solo competition. We came back and I went to a few piping competitions down to Christchurch, the New Zealand Championships, and got a third prize in the top March competition and so forth. Then in 75 we came over to Scotland, not for the tattoo, but purely to compete for 6 weeks. That was the year that Worlds was down at Derby.
Yeah, that's an unusual year.
Yeah, and we went to London first. We stayed in London in Hounslow Barracks. I'm not quite sure how that was arranged for a week. We went up to Derby, we competed, and then we went off to Canada with all the Grade 1 bands.
Yeah.
The big Canadian thing.
That was intercontinental thing.
That was it.
Yeah, aye.
2 big 707s or something, old planes flew us out to Canada. And,
fantastic.
we had a week there just with all these different pipe bands, and you know, I was 18, 19 or something.
That was Toronto?
Toronto, yeah.
Aye.
Then we came back and we stayed at the Halls of residence at Pollock Halls for Edinburgh University. And we went to the Shots Games, Rosé Games, Dunoon, because the Worlds had been done by that time.
Yeah.
We went back to New Zealand and I didn't really settle, and I finished my apprenticeship. And the guy that I worked for, he unfortunately got cancer, and he was ill, and he brought in a manager. And so I had an argument with the manager one day, so I just told him to stick it. And I jumped on my motorbike and I went downtown and I bought a one-way ticket to Scotland.
Have you been back since?
It took me a long time to get back. I
Aye.
went home, had a ticket for about a week later, so I sold up everything.
Aye.
I told my mother that I was off to Scotland. Mainly for the 2 years. In those days, it was a lot more difficult. Today, guys pop backwards and forwards and come over for different competitions.
Yes.
Everybody plays around the world now.
Aye.
I mean, you know, half of these bands come from around the world, you know.
Aye.
Half the top bands.
But that plane at that time had a couple of engines on it, need fueled up every couple of 100 miles, eh?
Just about that. No, you're right. I had to stop in Honolulu or something to get to Los Angeles, and then I think Los Angeles.
You came that way, did you?
Yeah, I came that way. So. But it would have been both ways, of course. But
Yeah.
no, it was a big thing, you know. But that was me back in 1976. I arrived in August, just before Oban and Inverness. Too late to enter those competitions, but
Yes.
went to both of them. And
Get an idea as to the standard, eh?
got an idea of the standard. Met Murray Henderson,
Okay.
who I knew from New Zealand, of course, and Murray had been over at that stage 2 or 3 years. And also met Jimmy McIntosh. And so decided to live in Dundee. Jimmy was very helpful, actually. He had a friend who was a manager of a big building company in Dundee. So he got me a job in the workshop there. It was actually a joiner's workshop, but having been a cabinet maker, I could use all the machines. So, so that was me set up. I had a job, and first of all, I lived in a guest house for about 6 months until I got a flat, you know. But I used to go to Jimmy for lessons, and then out to Murray as well.
Good teachers.
Good teachers. So Jimmy really started me on my P-bro, and the first tune he gave me was, when I look back, it was quite a big tune, but MacLeod Arrasay Salute. So right in, and then Mary MacLeod.
Lament for Mary MacLeod.
Yeah.
And what setting did you play that? So was it Kilberry or was it the Cameron Centre?
Well, very much what I would call the Donald MacLeod setting. I'm not sure if Jimmy gave me that, or
you maybe picked that up later on.
Well, I went over it with Captain Andrew McKeithley, and that would be the Donald MacLeod setting, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, well, from Bob Brown, it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
So from that school, you know.
Right.
But so I was really just there as a surveyor. I had no intention of joining the military. And we were going around some games, and Jimmy hadn't, obviously they hadn't immigrated then. Jimmy and Murray were still working together.
Yes. Making
the reeds, but Jimmy was quite busy, so I tended to go to Murray more than Jimmy. And then Colonel Graham Murray, not Colonel DJS Murray, but a Colonel Graham Murray, who was a colonel in the Queensland Highlanders. He was in charge of a TA unit at Perth, 151 Highlanders it was called then, the old Black Watch, but it also incorporated the Liverpool Scottish and the London Scottish.
Okay.
So at this stage, Jeff Ross had come across. He'd been in New Zealand. He's from Australia originally, but he'd gone to New Zealand. He'd come across, and another friend of mine, John Patterson, the three of us were living in a flat in Dundee. That's Jeff Ross of the Ross Bags fame.
Is that right?
And so we were sharing a flat, and this colonel wrote to us and said, why don't you come and join the TA and I'll pay you to play pipes. So we thought, this is good, you know. So we joined the TA.
Never mentioned guns or anything.
No, well, we didn't have to do any of that stuff, you know.
No.
He looked after us and we joined. We got combats and kilts, and he gave us Land Rovers to go off to the games, and we
My goodness,
got cheap drink in the mess. And
so it was all outwards,
it was great, you know. We just played in the band, and he protected us, and you know, I wasn't fully aware of what was happening, you know, but he worked on me, and he was really instrumental in getting me into the regular army.
So how long were you TA?
Well, only about 18 months.
Okay.
Because he worked on me, probably seen that there was a inkling there. And he very cunningly sent me up to Edinburgh Castle to do a TA course.
Okay.
And so there I was, at this stage I was 20 or 21 in Edinburgh Castle, looking over this magnificent views, going into this school with the polished floors and the photographs of all these famous pipers hanging on the walls, and Angus MacDonald cutting around, Andrew Bekeefley, and just soaking up this atmosphere. I remember walking out in the morning and just standing there looking over and thinking, you know, New Zealand to this, you know. And then I went back, and he said that he could arrange for me to go to Ian Morrison, who was one of the top players at that stage, and he said I could arrange for you to go and get some lessons off Ian Morrison. They were stationed at Kirknewton, just outside Edinburgh here.
And Ian Morrison, what regiment was he in?
Queen's Own Highlanders.
Queen's Own Highlanders, and they were stationed at Kirknewton?
Kirknewton, just outside Edinburgh here, about
Okay.
10 miles from where we are here.
Yeah.
And I said, that sounds fantastic, you know. And he says, oh, we'll fix it up. So I spoke to my boss and thought he was talking about a couple of weeks, you know. And then he came back to me and said, well, we can't do it for 2 weeks. You would have to sign up for a year. I said, a year? He said, well, you can get in on a special type engagement through the TA, and you can go for 1 year to the army and join the Queen's Own. Now, I had seen the boys of the Queen's Own up at Inverness in '77, and they seemed to be enjoying themselves, all these young lads, Peter Fraser and Robert Barnes and all these guys in the bar drinking, but also winning prizes, and winning some of the top prizes. And I thought this life looked pretty good to me, you know. So I said, okay, I'll sign up for a year. And he left it for a couple more weeks, and then he said, well, actually, you'll probably have to do basic training. And I said, what's that? Well, nothing much. But I would start running now if I was you. So I said, okay. So if he had given me all that in one go,
no, it wasn't happening.
So he was clever. He drip fed it to me. And just as I was about to go off and start basic training, he says, great news, Hitchins. I said, what's that, sir? He says, the 1st Battalion's going off to Northern Ireland, Crossmaglen. He said, what a year you'll have, basic training at Crossmaglen.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Anyway, I joined, and I did the basic training, which actually I found quite easy. I mean, it's common sense, bit of fitness and attitude's all it is, you know.
Yeah. This is you selling it to future soldiers now, isn't it? Okay.
Soldiering is fitness and attitude. It's as simple as that, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Common sense prevails.
Yeah.
And so then I went to the battalion. Now, at the Queen's Own, I could talk more about them, but they had a great attitude towards piping, and particularly solo piping. And they always endeavoured to leave 4 to 6 pipers behind whenever they went away, and they would go around the games. So in '79 was no difference. They were leaving 4 pipers behind, and it was Ian Morrison, myself, and Pete Fraser and Robert Barnes were chosen. And I'm sure I was only chosen because the colonel had influence, but Unfortunately, Robert and Peter fell foul of the discipline of the army, and they was deemed that they weren't to stay behind, and they had to go to
Cross McGlen.
yes. And anyway, I went around the games with Ian Morrison.
How did you find Ian? Good player?
Oh, excellent player. I think Ian.
Just for the viewers sitting in the Pacific.
Well, I think for anybody that hasn't heard Ian Morrison play, I would say, and Alistair Gillis would have agreed to me. I think Ian Morrison was the finest rugby player I've ever heard. I don't think there's anyone comes even close.
Right.
It's light music, but his playing overall was just fantastic. He played a well balanced but quiet set of pipes. He didn't play a big set of pipes, an indoor pipe. But very well balanced, very musical, and his playing was very musical. And Ian was one of the first, I think, to have this. He did play slightly round, but people confused that. He still had the expression.
Yes.
But he got this tremendous flow to it.
Aye.
That people thought it was round, and Alistair had that in some of his playing,
but flow is the ultimate in the expression of music, isn't it?
You've got to have the expression first, and then
and
you can
right through the flow, and the Pibroch playing it, that's got to be expressed as a flow.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think control and flow are the two magic words when you're talking about it. And I think
so Morrison had that.
He had it. He had it in bucketfuls.
Aye.
I mean, he was taught from Donald MacLeod, so he was a pupil of Donald's, and Ian had it. And he practiced, but he practiced all day, a lot by himself, so we didn't get a lot of tuition off Ian, but that wasn't, say, being particular bad towards Ian. It was a sort of army thing in general. You went on courses, you got some tuition now, but there was plenty of other guys in the Queen Zone. I mentioned Robert Barnes, there was Ronnie McCourt, there was Alistair that came later, and Pete Fraser, who actually won the Strasbourg and Rio when he was 18 before grading. In the 70s, so there was a lot of tremendous good players there, and even some really good players that didn't compete. And you could learn off all these guys because you heard them playing, and when you played, you knew they were listening to you. So there was just this self-teaching and
observance,
and being in that company. So your pipes got better, everybody's pipes were the same, and everybody could get their pipes going, and had to have their pipes going, you know. So you lived in that environment, because we all lived together.
And were you playing that set of pipes that you mentioned at the beginning?
Sorry, I should have, but when I played for about 5 years, and I think I won quite a big competition in New Zealand, my grandfather gave me the family pipes.
So that was you and the pipes welded together, right?
Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm only a custodian of them in my lifetime. I mean, they're not mine.
What chanter did you play at that time?
When I came over in, I can't remember, the City of Wellington had we brought Warmark chanters of plastic, and before that I think we were playing Hardy's or Granger and Campbell or something. But when I came over, Jimmy McIntosh and Murray fixed up for, I went down to Sinclair's and got a Sinclair chanter. Sinclair chanter, right. And so I played Sinclair, but then it switched to Neil in about 1980 or 81, you know. So I was playing, and I still play the same Nile chanter now that I was playing then, you know. Still good, you know. But going back to 79 was, Ian and I went around the games, so I learnt a lot by just going around the games, being with Ian, soaking up this atmosphere, going around, having the time. Ian would listen to me, not all the time, but he did give me some tapes of Donald MacLeod. Now these tapes are now accessible, but Donald had given copies of these tapes to the army years ago, the big reel-to-reels. And the military had a copy of this, and Ian had personal tapes from Donald, but there were copies of that. One of the tunes that year in the Silver Medal was Rory MacLeod's Lament. A tune that's well underestimated by a lot of people. A fairly straightforward tune, but the first two variations, really to bring that tune out, are full of subtleties. And it's really just the subtleties that makes the huge difference.
And Donald had all that sussed out.
Exactly, because once you get into the two riff and the croon riff, they're pretty straightforward. The straightforward lines show the end of the lines, and there's not much you have to do there except for technique. But the first two variations is probably really the whole tune, and so and I wasn't really getting it, so Em gave me this tape and said, listen to that. And so I used to play this tape for hours, listening and playing and following the tape. And when I went to the Silver Medal in '79, the tune that was selected was Roy McLeod's Lament.
Great.
And the bike was going great. It was a fantastic day. There was 56 people entered in the Silver Medal competition. And I was number 56.
Your last one?
Yeah, last one.
Aye.
Played about 8 o'clock or 8:30 at night or something. I don't think all 56 played. I think there was some draws and stuff like that.
Aye, but there'd be enough there to clutter up the place. Aye.
Breakdowns. But anyway, I played about 8:30 at night and won it.
Aye.
But
Fantastic.
I just remember, in fact, I hardly remember playing the tune because I just sort of went into this thinking about the tape.
Yeah.
And I went back to the tape and just thought, right, just concentrated on that, you know.
Yeah.
I always remember coming off and going round to the back of the hole, putting my pipes around and going round the back of the hole. And Captain John McLennan was standing there. In those days, we had to compete in the military uniform.
Yes.
These days they don't, but I had the service dress jacket, the brown jacket on, the belt and all that, you know. Captain John was standing at the back and he said, oh, I enjoyed your tune, it was very good. And I said, did I play the whole thing? Did I miss something out? Because it seemed to go so quick, you know.
Aye, aye.
And he said, I don't think so, they just announced you won it.
Aye. Fantastic moment in your life, eh?
It was, in a way, a fantastic moment, and it also probably changed my life, because what happened then was the regiment was due to go to Hong Kong for 2 years.
Uh-huh.
And I had been in Hong Kong on the way back in New Zealand. We'd stopped at Hong Kong for 2 days. And I'd come all the way from New Zealand to Scotland. And I really didn't fancy going off to Hong Kong for 2 years.
Aye.
And I'd only joined for a year, so I could leave. So somebody sent for me and said, oh, you need to sign on if you're going to Hong Kong. I said, well, I'm not signing on, I'm not going to Hong Kong. And they said, oh, but we want you to. And I said, well, I don't want to, I'm not going to, you know. I said, maybe when you come back from Hong Kong I might join again, but, you know, I've come all the way from New Zealand, I'm not. No, but so, it was 2 or 3 weeks later, I got sent for by the commanding officer. And the commanding officer called me in and said, we want you to stay in the regiment. And I said, well, that's very kind of you, but that's not what I want. He said, well, I'll make you a deal. You can stay here, you can go up on the Pipe Majors course, you can do the Pipe Majors course, you won't have to go to Hong Kong, although I do want you to come out to the end of Hong Kong so that you will have it in your military career, but you need to sign on for 6 years. But that will include the time when you started, you know.
Yes, aye.
I said, fair enough, that's a deal.
Okay.
So I was very fortunate. I went up and I did about 18 months at the castle. So, because I hadn't done the senior pipers course, which you have to do before that.
Aye, so you did that senior pipers course?
In April, May. Then I had the summer of 1980 around the games again.
Okay.
Competed at Oban Inverness again, and then I started the Pipe Majors course. And that was the first year that Angus MacDonald was the Pipe Major. And it was Andrew Keithley who was the director. It was his last year. So it was only one course where those two worked together.
Okay.
And it was a fantastic experience.
How did you find Andrew Keithley?
Just
What kind of player was he, etc.?
an outstanding player. Underestimated, because he was a very unassuming man, never put himself forward, but an absolutely outstanding player. And I think anybody that has heard him play, and Ian McLennan talks very fondly of Andrew, because he was in Andrew's band in the Argyles.
So did Brian Donaldson, funnily enough.
Well, I think anybody that met Andrew.
Yeah.
But Andrew wasn't a man to put himself out or didn't really get involved in the Pembroke Society or so forth. But Andrew won the gold medal in 1948 with Donald MacLeod. He was up at the Highland Brigade School at Fort George. So at that stage he was a corporal at the school there for 2 years with Donald MacLeod. So he had Donald MacLeod teaching him.
Right.
But he was obviously a player of ability. But he gave up competing after that. And he never really competed again. But then in 1966 he became the Queen's Piper. And he spent almost 10 years as the Queen's Piper. the sovereign's piper,
Uh-huh.
and he would spend every summer for at least 3 months up in Balmoral. So he got 3 months, and in those days him and Bob Brown, Bob Nicol, they just did piping all the time.
Okay.
So they totally immersed. So when you learn from Andrew, he had so much knowledge about all the tunes, and he could say, well, this is the way Donald played it, and this is the way Bob's played it. Now, he learnt off these guys before photocopying and before tape recorders,
Yeah.
and his book was just full of notations and notes, and Bob played this and cut this and
Yeah.
this way and that way, and he could go through, and he would never interrupt you when you played P-Rock. He would always let you finish, and you knew if the tune was going well, he used to smoke a pipe, and if you're sitting back and just sort of like, but if you came round and the smoke was coming out the pipe, you knew that he wasn't enjoying it much, you know.
Aye.
And he used to write down, I went back to him years later, and he taught a lot of us. He taught Alistair, Gordon, myself, Michael Elder and all that, after he retired from the army, all for free, wouldn't take a penny,
Okay.
and he taught us. And he used to write down, keep a note of all the tunes he would give you, you know. So, but his thing was P-Rock. And so when we did the pipe majors course, you used to go into Andrew's office for P-Rock, and then you'd come out and Angus would be standing there, right this way.
Angus MacDonald.
Angus MacDonald, and you'd go into Angus's office and you'd get the light music pumped into you, you know.
And of course, we haven't, because we missed, Angus died a few years ago, and various folk in the interviews in Pipers'Persuasion have mentioned Angus, but I'd like to have your own take on Angus MacDonald.
Well, there's been so much said about, and we haven't really discussed the army school, but the army school was Willie Ross and then John McLennan and sort of Angus MacDonald with the big names. And I was fortunate enough to get in that position, but when I was there, Angus was one of those, a man's man, I suppose it's been said, and he was so easy to get on with. You'd go in his office and there was a big metal locker, and you'd be playing matches, and next minute you'd start thumping this locker, and you'd be pointing and thumping and pointing, and give me this and cut that, and then he would grab the pipes off you and play your pipes and play them, give them back to you, but very enthusiastic and all that, but an easy guy to speak to, but a good common sense guy, you know. I mean, I remember once that I was due to go back to the battalion, and they said they wouldn't promote me because I hadn't done any soldiering, and so I was a lance corporal on the course, but Angus said to me, look, soldiering's simple, and I think I said it before, but Angus one, you know, a bit of fitness and common sense, and he said, you seem to have common sense, and actually through my whole military career I always remember that advice was very good, you know.
Yeah.
And I think Angus was good at that, not just at the playing, but he was also good at helping people and helping many people, you know.
Yeah. So, okay, you're on the course there at that point. Anything else about that particular, your course, and then we'll do the soldiering bit and then come back to your progression until you arrive back, and then you tell us about the army school piping at that point.
Okay, well, yeah, we seem to have progressed. I mean, on the course was, well, we were just steeped in this. The music theory, it was a big part of the course, and it was Angus's first course, so he taught that. Music writing, you had to write out all the music, had to be able to write all the tunes correctly and neatly in the different time signatures in the time that was allocated for the test. In those days, a 3-hour test at the end of the course, the same with the music theory, and the history. And in the history side of it, we had to learn about the families and the Crimmins and all that, and then about famous pipers. And the history side, probably I didn't think it was very relevant at the time, but actually the history has served me well over the years. Obviously going back to that job, but also a lot of other people, history is too easily forgotten, you know.
Yes.
And I think once it's forgotten, then it's lost, and actually been part, when I was pipe major of the regiment, Colonel Ferry, who was another person who was Colonel DJS's adjutant. He was regimental secretary, very instrumental in the Northern meetings and the Queen's Own Highlanders Museum at Fort George. And he took me around Fort George to the museum one day for a whole day and explained to me that part of the job at Pipe Major, because you're there for 5 years, was also a custodian of tradition and the history of the regiment and making sure that these standards were maintained.
Okay.
I think a lot of that's been lost or forgotten in the modern warfare today in the army, and I think today lost or regretted.
Yes.
And if you lose these things, it's very hard to get them back. However, I'm jumping away from the course.
That's okay.
But so the course, there was 11 of us on the course. Gordon Webster went on to become the Sovereign's Piper. A few of us became Pipe Majors. And Archie Lindsay was on the course with me. He was a Queen's Own Highlander, fellow Queen's Own. He came from South Uist, and Archie composed the Skylark section, you know.
Aye, which was played at Uist Barra with somebody last week.
Right, okay.
Yes.
Well, so Archie was a good composer and a good player too, you know. So there was a lot of good people. We were just steeped in that time, just good piping, and life was pretty rosy, you know. But after the course, I went back to the battalion out to Hong Kong for a short time, then down to Tidworth in England when we came back from Hong Kong. And then of course the Falklands came along and in '82, and the battalion got ready to deploy to the Falklands, but I was getting posted to Bridge of Dawn, which was a junior service up in Aberdeen. The boy soldiers went there for 18 months from the ages of 16 till 18. I was told if the battalion deployed before I was posted, I would be deploying to the Falklands. And I think I got on the train on the Saturday and the battalion got orders to deploy the next day. So I missed the Falklands, you know. And,
you'd be quite happy about that. Brian Donaldson told us all about it in his interview.
Yes,
he was there, you know.
He was there. He got taken off his Pipe Major's course to go there.
He said he to sit the final exam on in transit in the ship to do his written exams and send them back.
So I missed that. I went up to Aberdeen, but was reunited with Ian Morrison as the Pipe Major there.
Okay.
So I was back with Ian again, and Ian and got some more tuition, and solo-wise I was doing some more playing, competing. I was picking up no major prizes, but I picked up second in the March at Inverness and second in the Strasbourg Rail actually, I think, in '82 and some others, and picked up some prizes at Skye and the Peabrook, but didn't actually win any big prizes, like, you know. Spent 2 years there, and then I had to go back to the battalion. Was in this stage was serving in Northern Ireland, and I'd only been in the army about 5 years, so I was a full corporal up at Aberdeen, and they said, "You're going back as Pipe Sergeant." And I said, "Well, I can't be. I've only been in 5 years, you know." And they said, "No, it's been decided that you're going back as Pipe Sergeant," which didn't make me the most popular guy in the band. You remember that some of these guys in the band had to wait 6 years to get on the Pipe Major's course. And I'd waltzed in the door of this New Zealand piper and went straight on the Pipe Major's course, promoted, and up at Bridge of Dawn for 2 years, and now coming back as Pipe Sergeant, and some of the guys that were still privates, you know, when I joined, you know.
That's tough at the top.
Well, I think probably my colonel friend had some influence in that, but anyway. But they said I had to do some soldiering courses. So I went back and did a senior soldiers course, found it quite easy, got top or second in that. Then in Northern Ireland, we had to zero the weapons every week. And the pipe band was deployed sometimes. We were there for 2 years, so the pipe band deployed sometimes as a platoon down the borders. But a lot of the time we spent in the camp, which was by the airport at Northern Ireland there. And we did escort duties into town when we had to, so in with pistols and that. But it meant that I had to pass a test every week to have a certificate to say that it had been done. It was always difficult to find someone to get the range and book it, so I said, "Look, I'll go and do skill of arms, and then I'll be qualified, and I could just test the boys and do all this myself." So I said, "Great." So I went off and did the skill of arms course, which is 6 weeks or 8 weeks, got distinction. So I came back on that, and somebody jokingly said, well, next you'll do senior Brecon, which is a tactical thing for sergeants, you know.
Uh-huh.
So I said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. So I did it. I found it easy. Once again, I was recommended to go back as an instructor. I just missed out on the distinction because I sprained my ankle in the last week. But so soldering I found quite easy. It's going back to Angus, common sense and fitness, and that got me through. And then we were in Fort George, and I was promoted to pipe major. But even as pipe sergeant, I more or less stopped competing, because I felt that when you got into these senior positions, you had to run the band and be more dedicated to the job I was doing.
Apart from anything else, why expose yourself, you know, and you've really got to take on your responsibilities. And
well, there was that, and I felt that the pipe major's job was to be with the band. And previous pipe majors had been away competing or doing their own thing and not with the band, and I felt that you have to, and also at this stage, the band, you're dead right in one respect, because the band was full of Alistair Gillis, Michael Gray, Neil Matheson, all these guys that went on to win gold medals, and we had, and I used to send 2 guys on every pipe majors course. So we had 13 or 14 pipe major certificates. We had about 4 or 5 silver medalists in the band, you know.
There's not too many that kind of talent in the British Army now, eh?
No, it's a different story today.
Yeah. So you were pipe major, and when you had all these chaps in the band.
Yes, yeah. And fantastic guys they were, and
that just again to reiterate, that was the Queen's Own.
The Queen's Own Highlanders.
Highlanders, yeah. Okay.
Which was formerly the Seaforths and the Camerons.
Right. Okay.
So I had this, but we had a short time in Inverness at Fort George, and then we were stationed to
I take it you'd signed on for more years, but
well, at this stage, at this stage, obviously, the career was developing.
6 years had long expired.
Yes. Well, not that long. 86, I promoted to pipe major. You know.
Okay.
Then we went to Germany, so it was a mixture of soldering and piping, but still a lot of piping, you know.
Right.
And so we toured the continent a lot. We came back and competed once with the band. I made sure that the guys always got back, at least 6 guys or more were back to compete. And they could always get back and compete around the games. And then Alistair came back, not initially, but after about 2 years, Alistair came back as my pipe sergeant, you know. And that was an idea to train him up, get him in that position to take over from me. And so, yeah, and a mixture, as I say, of soldering and, but then in 1990 we went to Belfast as a rifle platoon. I was platoon commander. So we served there as soldiers. And we came back and did the big blow in 1990, when it was the last big blow that the Scottish Division did, all the Scottish Division bands, the Commonwealth bands and everything, so about 2,000 musicians, and brass bands and pipe bands.
Whereabouts was that?
Coast Guards parade in London, you know.
London, yeah.
With the Queen attending, of course. And so
Okay.
forth, so. And then in 91 we did the Gulf War, so in the end of 90 we went up to the Gulf War. And then we did that as a machine gun platoon. Then we came back from there and we toured America. We did the 3-month tour of America. And at the end of that, and the last part of America is normally in Madison Square Gardens. And in Madison Square Gardens I did the solo. And normally Alistair would do the solo, or anybody would do the solo, but quite often Alistair. During that tour, Alistair came back, we let him come back to the Glenfiddich, and that's when he won his first Glenfiddich competition in 91. So when he came back, obviously he did the solo as a sort of world champion piper, you know, which he rightfully deserved. But in Madison Square Gardens I did the solo, so I can say I played Madison Square Gardens. But after that show, shook hands with Alistair, and that was really not the official, but that was my last job with the band as pipe major. We went back to Germany and Alistair took over, And I went to the depot up to, but at this stage the Bridge of Dawn had closed at Aberdeen and had shifted up to Glencoast, the other side of Edinburgh here.
Okay, and what were they doing there?
Well, this is what they called the phase 3, so they had a pipe major, pipe sergeant and a drum major out there with 5 corporals. And they were training soldiers to be pipers and drummers basically.
Yes.
And the younger ones. So that was a bigger school, probably about 30, 35 people.
Uh-huh.
So that was a bigger school there.
And that course lasted for
Well,
the individuals?
Yeah, they run various courses at different lengths.
It was
drumming courses.
2 or 3 months or what?
It's mainly 6.
6?
Yeah, 3 months to 6 months, you know.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes for a year,
Okay.
you know.
Depending on what course it was?
What course, what level, and
Yeah.
what they were running at the time, you know.
Uh-huh.
But the course at the castle still remained the pipe majors course, which was
Right.
for 1 year. And so the 2 were separate. But I did a year and a half at Glencoast, and then in '93 I was appointed pipe major, senior pipe major in W1,
Uh-huh.
and chief instructor at the Army School of Piping, which was at Edinburgh Castle at the time.
Edinburgh Castle.
Yeah.
And the director of the Army School of Piping was a rank above you, and that was a commissioned officer.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was in charge and you were 2IC. Is that the way it works?
That's dead correct. That's
Yeah.
correct, yeah.
But for the day-to-day running, you were effectively in charge of the course.
Correct. Because
Right.
the director had other responsibilities and so
Yeah.
forth, you know. So.
He took overall responsibility.
So my responsibility was running the course, yeah.
The course. And so that was from
93 until 2000.
93 till 2000.
Mm.
Okay. And I'll tell you what, before we go any further, you've mentioned the Army School of Piping. Now, can we just have a wee potted history going back to Willie Ross?
When the school first started, when Willie Ross took over the school in 1918, when it shifted up to the castle, the school was at the very top of the castle. It's quite significant that the Army and the Peabrook Society felt it necessary that the school was up in the top in the royal apartments. And Willie Ross actually lived up there, and we'll go up there and have a look. Once Willie shifted out of the school in '58, the school shifted to various locations, and we'll have a look at that. Well, this is the National War Memorial, which is, we're now at the top of the castle in Crown Square, where the National War Memorial for the First World War, and of course all those killed since, names are placed. The significance of this is that this is the top of the rock in the capital city, and on the very top of that rock is all the names of the soldiers, the people that were killed in the First World War. So this is a very significant place, but higher than that was the Army class where Willie Ross used to teach up in these top windows. Was the Army class when it started in 1918, it became the Army School of Piping. And Willie taught there from 1918 until 1957 when he became too ill to carry on. And there's quite a good interview I heard many years ago about one of Willie's most famous people, John D. Burgess, who won both gold medals at the age of 16, of course. And John used to come up to get lessons off Willie, go up the spiral staircase up to the school, and when John went up to tell Willie that he had joined the Cameron Highlanders and not the Scots Guards, John said that he threw him down the spiral staircase, so that's the staircase. But Willie used to live here as well, and he lived through this door, where Willie had the ground floor was just a reception room, kitchen. The living room was in the middle floor, bedrooms up the top, so Willie lived up here and worked. We were up in the Crown Square where we've seen where Willie had the school and where Willie lived. Once Willie lived and it was decided that Captain John was taken over, the school shifted for a short time into the barrack block down in the casements. Then this building became available. This square was known as Hospital Square. During the war and before that was a hospital for officers, and also some German pilots and so forth were in here as well. This top part of the building became the Army School of Piping right along there. And this far end over here was the office, the director's office of Captain Johns and so forth. And my office when I was up here was just up in this building.
Up there.
There was 2 big classrooms and a couple of soundproof booths. through this doorway where they're going now, used to be an archway, and there used to be a small, very small staircase up there. And this big door was only used on posh occasions when we had generals and so forth visiting. We've come round now to the last piping school in the castle before it shifted out to Redford Barracks. The Historic Scotland wanted the building that we were at up at Crown Square to complete the museum. So Historic Scotland had to build this new building down the back here. I jokingly said one day that now we're on the edge of the castle, they'll push us over. I didn't know 2 years later that we would actually shift. That's another saying in the army, if they build you a new building, you know you're going to shift. So this building was purposely built. You can see it's a modern building built in the same way as the castle. And it had two big classrooms with the officers in the middle. But the school unfortunately was only here for a couple of years before it was decided to amalgamate this school along with the junior school, which is at Glen Course, and everything shifted up to Redford where we're going next. The other thing though, quickly, we have a chance to have a look at this massive building behind us, and that's where all the soldiers stayed, all the pipers stayed when they came up on the courses down here. So everybody actually lived in the castle, dined in the castle, and it was quite a residence really for the year when you came on the courses to stay in the castle. But at this stage, the Bridge of Dawn had closed at Aberdeen and had shifted up to Glencourse, the other side of Edinburgh here.
Okay, and what were they doing there?
Well, this is what they called the phase 3, so they had a pipe major, pipe sergeant and a drum major out there with 5 corporals. And they were training soldiers to be pipers and drummers basically.
Yes.
And the younger ones. So that was a bigger school, probably about 30, 35 people.
Uh-huh.
So that was a bigger school there.
And that course lasted for
Well,
the individuals? I mean.
Yeah, they run various courses at different lengths.
Aye,
So
was it
drumming courses.
2 or 3 months or what?
It's mainly 6.
6?
Yeah, 3 months to 6 months, you know.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes for a year, you know.
Depending on what course it was.
What course, what level, and
Yeah.
what they were running at the time, you know.
Uh-huh.
But the course at the castle still remained the pipe majors course, which was
Aye.
for 1 year. And so the two were separate. But I did a year and a half at Glencourse, and then in '93 I was appointed pipe major, senior pipe major in W1,
Uh-huh.
and chief instructor at the Army School of Piping, which was at Edinburgh Castle at the time.
Edinburgh Castle.
Yeah.
And the director of the Army School of Piping was a rank above you, and that was a commissioned officer.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was in charge and you were 2IC. Is that
Yes,
the way it works?
That's dead correct. That's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
But for the day-to-day running, you were effectively in charge of the course.
Correct. Because
Right.
the director had other responsibilities and so
Yeah.
on, you know. So.
He took overall responsibility.
So my responsibility was running the course. Yeah.
The course. And so that was from
93 until 2000.
93 till 2000.
Mm.
Okay. Any, I'll tell you what, before we go any further, you've mentioned the Army School of Piping. Now, can we just have a wee potted history going back to Willie Ross?
When the school first started, when Willie Ross took over the school in 1918, when it shifted up to the castle, the school was at the very top of the castle. It's quite significant that the Army and the Pembroke Society felt it necessary that the school was up in the top in the royal apartments. And Willie Ross actually lived up there, and we'll go up there and have a look. Once Willie shifted out of the school in 58, the school shifted to various locations, and we'll have a look at that. Well, this is the National War Memorial, which is, we're now at the top of the castle in Crown Square. There's the National War Memorial for the First World War, and of course all those killed since names are placed. The significance of this is that this is the top of the rock in the capital city, and on the very top of that rock is all the names of the soldiers, the people that were killed in the First World War. So this is a very significant place, but higher than that was the Army class where Willie Ross used to teach up in these top windows. Was the Army class when it started in 1918, became the Army School of Piping. And Willie taught there from 1918 until 1957 when he became too ill to carry on. And there's quite a good interview I heard many years ago about one of Willie's most famous people, John D. Burgess, who won both gold medals at the age of 16, of course. And John used to come up to get lessons off Willie, go up the spiral staircase up to the school, and when John went up to tell Willie that he joined the Cameron Highlanders and not the Scots Guards, John said that he threw him down the spiral staircase, so that's the staircase. But Willie used to live here as well, and he lived through this door, where Willie had the ground floor was just a reception room, kitchen, living room was in the middle floor, bedrooms up the top. So Willie lived up here. We're up in the Crown Square where we've seen where Willie had the school and where Willie lived. Once Willie lived and it was decided that Captain John was taken over, the school shifted for a short time into the barrack block down in the casements. Then this building became available. This square was known as Hospital Square. During the war, before that was a hospital for officers, and also some German pilots and so forth were in here as well. This top part of the building became the Army School of Piping right along there. And this far end over here was the director's office of Captain John's and so forth. And my office when I was up here was just up in this building. Up there. There were 2 big classrooms and a couple of soundproof booths. Through this doorway where the building now used to be an archway, there used to be a small, very small staircase up there. And this big door was only used on posh occasions when we had generals and so forth visiting. We've come round now to the last piping school in the castle before it shifted out to Redford Barracks. The Historic Scotland wanted the building that we were at up in Crown Square to complete the museum. So Historic Scotland had to build this new building down the back here. I jokingly said one day that now we're on the edge of the castle, they'll push us over. I didn't know 2 years later that we would actually shift. That's another saying in the army, if they build you a new building, you know you're going to shift. So this building was purposely built. You can see it's a modern building built in the same way as the castle. And it had 2 big classrooms with the officers in the middle. But the school unfortunately was only here for a couple of years before it was decided to amalgamate this school along with the junior school, which is an course, and everything shifted up to Redford where we're going next. The other thing though, quickly, we have a chance to have a look at this massive building behind us, and that's where the soldiers stayed, or the pipers stayed when they came up on the courses down here. So everybody actually lived in the castle, dined in the castle, and it was quite a residence really for the year when you came on the courses to stay in the castle. Actually, some people said you shouldn't have joined the Queen's Own, or advised people not to join the Queen's Own because they had so many good players. And I would say the opposite. It's better to be with the best.
Oh, aye.
And rub shoulders and learn off them.
Yes.
And that certainly happened in my case.
Yeah.
And I think that raises your own standard. But also the Queen's Own was steeped in history.
Yeah.
And piping history. They had respect for pipers.
Yes.
And I think that was so crucial to me. Now, pipers are soldiers first, and I never had any problem with that. But as long as you were treated like pipers and not soldiers.
Aye.
So I used to say to commanding officers, treat us like pipers and we'll soldier when you need us. But if you start treating us like soldiers and expect us to pipe, it's not on. Because actually, at the end of the day, you're a volunteer piper.
Aye.
Because there's no such thing as a piper or drummer in the army.
Aye.
That you just happen to play. So anyway, going back, obviously the Seaforth Islanders, Donald MacLeod, D.R. McLennan, John McLennan, Captain John, right? So there's all that history there. And the Cameron Highlanders, Emma McCrae and Colonel D.J.S. Murray, and of course going back years in history of these 2 famous piping regiments came together to form the Queen's Own. And the respect for piping within the Queen's Own was second to none, I feel, in any of the other regiments. And you had the likes of Captain John used to come out and give a lecture to the officers each year on Pibroch. And there was always a Pibroch played in the officers' mess, and everyone would have to be quiet. And in the sergeant's mess there'd be a Pibroch played, you know. People had to understand the background and the traditions and the importance of pipers within the regiments. So I always felt it to be an honour to have served in the same regiment and followed in the footsteps. In fact, the regimental pipe major wears these buckles, which was called Silver Joe. There was a pipe major of the Seaforths in the whatever in India, didn't think that his accoutrements were fancy enough, so he came back on leave, brought all these big silver buckles and sent the bill to the commanding officer. And but these buckles are still worn today.
Yeah.
And so when you're wearing these buckles, you're wearing buckles that Donald MacLeod wore, that D.R. McLennan wore, that, you know, when you go back. So it's a privilege to
Yes.
be in that position.
Yes.
And so I think piping was always strong there, and you always had the support, and it was important, and that was important to me as well, to feel that you were being valued, and that was part of it. And of course Captain John went up to the castle and took over. But going back to Willie Ross, I mean, the school, originally the Pipers'Persuasion Society was set up in 1903, I think was the first meeting. In 1905, 1907 they started teaching, and they had 3 teachers, but John MacDonald Inverness was the main teacher. And he started running an army class in Inverness in Cameron Barracks. So, well, 1910 was the first army class in Cameron Barracks. Because the army became very popular because they had the time, and they provided the class, and John MacDonald taught it at Inverness up until the First World War. And John enlisted in the Camerons, right, in militia, 4th Battalion, 4th, 5th Battalion Camerons, and went off to war, but wasn't there for long. He was invalided out. But the Pipers'Persuasion Society didn't like going up to Inverness because it was a whole day's journey, even by train in those days,
Yes.
to get up to Inverness. So it was decided that they would shift the army school, or the army class, down to Edinburgh, to Edinburgh and up to the castle, and put it in the castle where piping deserved to be, in the military at the top. And I think this goes back to the respect thing.
Yeah.
So we put the piping up the top in Edinburgh Castle. And John MacDonald was offered the job, but didn't want it. He was sort of settled in Inverness. And there's various other little things, but basically Willie Ross took over in 1918. He'd been invalided out or retired from the Scots Guards. So
Yeah.
he had been in the Boer War and the First World War. And so he took over in 1918 as a civilian, paid for by the Pipers'Persuasion Society, housed in Edinburgh Castle, and the piping school was Edinburgh Castle. And he ran what they call the piping, the army class. It was later changed to the Army Pipe Majors class, or then the Army Pipe Majors course. But he ran that class for 6 months every year, basically in the winter. And in the summer he would go off around Scotland teaching for the Pipers'Persuasion Society, up to Uist and different places, teaching. So a pretty good life, you know.
Absolutely. I mentioned that off camera. There's a good life in Edinburgh in the winter, and then away up, and he was at hunting and fishing and shooting. And
yeah, no, he liked shooting and fishing, so he did, and drinking, I think.
So a couple of hours fighting every day, and then away enjoying yourself.
That's it. I believe quite a lot of it was poaching as well. So.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
So, because he was a big influence on piping, bringing out his books,
Yes.
and doing his recordings, and
So you get Willie Ross's collection. How many books are in the collections? 8 or?
yes, I think it's 8.
Aye.
Yes. And of course the Scots Guards book, first edition, was based on a lot of Willie Ross's stuff, you know, although some of the tunes have been changed, the notation. But and he had a big influence on a lot of the older pipers. That a lot of pipers those days went through the army and to go up to the castle and get tuition from Willie. And he was meticulous in his music writing. And people had to, apparently used to hold the book up, and if all the grace notes just weren't quite right, he'd tear the page out. And they had to write all their tunes out. So that's how they learned how to write, and had to write it out. Everything had to be absolutely.
Okay, Bruce, we're in the what session?
Well, here we are again now. We're in Struer House, which is the army school. I have bagpipe music and Highland drumming, which is part of Redford Barracks and the outskirts of Edinburgh. This room here is known as the Pipe Majors class, and all the photographs that came down from the castle, when Captain John McLennan started running, they started taking the photographs. So the very first photograph, which is in 1960, the course started in 59, and you've got John Allen, who became Major John Allen, Director Army Bagpipe Music, and of course, very famously, Angus MacDonald, Pipe Major Angus. And the course goes down through, and I'm just looking for Norman Gillis is in one of these. I think about 64, 65. And anyway, we've got Norman Gillis, and of course later on you've got Alistair Gillis and Gordon Walker and many others. So each year represents, each photograph represents 1 year, which was one course per year.
So how many were on the course on an average?
Well, I started off there, it was quite small, as you can see, there's only about 6, you probably can't see that clear, but in the 80s the school was really doing well, and you can see that the courses here were getting up to 12 strong. When I came in here, and there's 7 there, there's 12 on one course. The very first course I did had 12.
Angus MacDonald would be on the early course, eh?
He did the very first course in 1960, but then Angus came back as Pipe Major, so he was here for a number of years as the Pipe Major. There's Angus and Andrew Keithley. Now that's the course I did in 1980, 81, and that was quite significant because that's the only course where we had Andrew Keithley and Angus together. And then after that, John Allen, it was Angus and John Allen became the director. So that carried on.
Yeah, that's excellent.
And over here we have the copies of Angus Mackay's books and his manuscripts. These are the books that were put into the National Library. So these are copies of all his original books. And
So that is on the handwritten?
that's all the handwritten stuff. So these are not the like printed books. This is a copy. These are copies of the original books
Angus Mackay.
of Angus Mackay. And in the back of one of them, he has written a lot of comments, if I can find it. When he was down in Dumfries in the hospital there, so you can't read a lot of it. But
And that's the Pipers'Persuasion Society collection. And
yeah, so it's just generally a lot of history here at the school, and we can have a look at some of the other photographs around the school.
Okay, that should do it.
You know,
And of course he had John Burgess, didn't he?
he taught John Burgess, of course, was probably his most famous pupil, but taught a lot of people, you know,
Aye.
obviously, you know.
And of course we've got a wee bit we'll insert about Burgess and Rolly Ross and the Windy Stair.
Yes, well, I think John, I heard an interview years ago, and I actually spoke to John about this, but John decided to join the Cameron Highlanders, I think because his family had come from up north.
Yeah.
And he went up to the castle to tell Willie Ross that he signed on, and initially Willie was very pleased, thinking that he had signed on to the Scots Guards, but when John told him he had joined the Cameron Highlanders, he picked up his pipes and pushed John down the stairs, the spiral staircase, and said, "Away with you, boy."
My goodness, eh?
But then, you know, the Cameron Highlanders, I mean, John D, Ian McFadgen, all these guys, you know, John McDougall,
John McDougall,
all in the Cameron Highlanders,
Aye.
you know.
wonderful piping at that time there.
Yeah,
Eh?
yeah. And then, so Willie Ross taught for all those years, and then in 57, there's a wonderful story, there's a photograph here actually, if we can, it's on this wall somewhere. In 54, they persuaded Willie to retire.
Uh-huh.
And they had a huge civic reception for him down in the city chambers in Edinburgh, black tie. There's 3 or 4 different lords, there was all the Pipers'Persuasion Society and all these people, all these gentlemen there. And the pipers are somewhere, it was John McLennan, Andrew Keithley, John Burgess and the pipers. And they gave this presentation to Willie, and somebody made the speech and said, "Thank you for your service," and all that. And Willie stood up and said, man, I'm not overwhelmed that all you fine gentlemen would come here to honour me. I couldn't possibly disappoint you, so I'll just carry on. He carried on for another 4 years.
Away, did he? My goodness.
They were all scared of Willie. You know.
Aye,
Yeah.
so that was him, eh?
So I did, because the...
So they wouldn't give him another civic reception at the end of the year.
I don't think I got another one of them.
No.
I think that was 54 or 55, and he became ill in 57.
Uh-huh.
And he went down to stay with his daughter, Cicely, down in England.
Aye.
And Gavin Stollett's father, George, finished that course in 57, 58.
Okay.
And then the army decided, the Pipers'Persuasion Society couldn't afford to employ another instructor and pay Willie a pension. And the army really thought it was time that they took on the responsibility anyway. So they set up a board to discuss it, which was run by DJS Murray, Colonel Majors, I think he was then. And it was really a toss-up between Donald MacLeod, Pipe Major Donald MacLeod, and Captain, well, as he was at that time, RSM John McLennan. He had moved up through the ranks to RSM W1. And it went to John. And John took over the job in 59 and ran the first course. With Angus MacDonald was on his first course, and John Allen, who went on to become a director.
And what part of Edinburgh Castle was that then?
Well, at this stage, they had left the top of the castle and had gone down to the hospital square.
Okay, Hospital Square.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're down in there. And first of all, John was still as a W1 until, I believe, 66, and he was commissioned. And so he became the first commissioned pipe, if you like, director of music.
Yeah.
Army bagpipe music.
Okay.
And then he carried on until 75. He ran the course by himself, very much like Willie, but in about 72, 73, David Aiken went up as pipe major, not as a W1, but as a pipe major to assist him. And then Captain John retired in 75, and in 75 he retired and Andrew McKeithley took over. And Andrew stayed there until 1981.
So that was the history there.
Yeah,
right?
but, and then after Andrew was John Allen.
John Allen.
John had been there for a long time as senior pipe major with John McLennan and also Andrew the whole time.
Did you know John Allen?
Yes, oh, very well, yes.
Aye, so how was he then? What kind of chap was he?
Oh, John was
good piper?
Oh yes, good piper, good musician. John played the box, so he understood all the music very well, right, and was very good at writing out harmonies and different tunes, you know. He actually wrote the tune, DJS Murray, but he wrote it as a 4/4 march, and it was Angus who changed it into a reel.
The reel, aye.
But no, John did a sterling. He spent a lot of time at the castle.
Aye.
Both as senior pipe major and then as director. Under his term as the director for 10 years, piping really flourished, and he did a fantastic job, you know.
Great.
And then, of course, after him was Gavin, you know.
Aye.
And Gavin was there until 2003 or something. And then Stuart Sampson and the present director, Stephen Small.
Stephen Small.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's evolved from Hospital Square, and then you were describing up in the castle, the purpose-built.
The Hospital Square, and then they wanted us to shift from there when I was pipe major. So I'm probably one of the most unfortunate guys that had to shift the Army School of Piping twice, so we shifted from Hospital Square. When I started in '93, we were in Hospital Square, and going back once again, huge privilege for me to go up there as a senior pipe major, the job that Angus had, you know, and if you took it back further, Willie Ross, whatever, you know. And piping and the castle seemed to be together because, I mean, you know, people used to say, oh, what job you do? No, pipe major of the castle. You know, I mean, that's the way the Army pipe was talked about. Yes. It wasn't like pipe major, or the pipe major, senior pipe major of the castle, you know.
Aye.
Everybody knew. And people used to talk in military terms and say, have you been to the castle yet?
Yeah.
which would mean have you been on the Pipe Majors course?
Yes, aye.
You know,
Aye.
but
It's synonymous, really.
but in '95, Historic Scotland wanted us to shift out of that building because they wanted to extend the museum. So they had to build us a purpose-built building along the back of the castle.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. We shifted the school down, and that was a smaller building, although in a way probably slightly better. It was purpose-built, so a nice building, and we shifted into that. But we were only there for 2 years, and then it was decided to amalgamate the two schools, along with what happens a lot in the military today, the accountants always win. So the two schools were put together, and we come out to this big building out here, and the Army School's been here since 2000. So that's how we ended up out here.
And you left the army at what time?
Well, 2000 I finished as the senior pipe major, but then I was commissioned on a TA commission, but given more or less a full-time job to help set up the cadet force pipes and drums.
Where did you go for that?
Well, I travelled all around. I had an office at the other end of Redford, so I had my own office in a small building up there with a few classrooms and stuff. But that was really, there wasn't much in the way of cadet piping, and there wasn't anything totally established in TA piping as well, piping and drumming. So we managed to set up a big cadet force. The 8 battalions now all have good pipes and drums. We used to run a camp up at Inverness with almost 200 kids out.
Yeah.
And that's built up into quite a good thing, you know.
Owen Nash became involved with, down in Manchester with them, and he brought them up to Inverness, didn't he?
Exactly, and they started their own pipe band down there. There's a couple of pipe bands down, and the Air Training Corps have 2 or 3 pipe bands in England. It's a great thing for the kids to be involved. 12 years to 18.
You're not still involved with that?
No, I retired from that altogether last year.
Last year?
Yeah.
And what are you doing now? What have you been doing basically since you left the army?
Well, when I left the army I was shifting to Akkodibui, and I thought, well, what can I do in Akkodibui? So I
Better tell folk where Akkodibui is.
it's northwest of Ullapool, way up on the west coast of Scotland. You know?
Wonderful.
A beautiful spot. So I designed my own drone reeds, the balance tone drone reed.
The
balance tone.
balance stone. Okay.
From Highland Reeds, Akkodibui.
Okay.
So I've been selling them, and also designed my own moisture systems.
Yes.
I actually have samples of these. But
Aye. We'll get a photograph.
okay, yeah. So the drone reed is, the tongue is straight rather than most tongues are bent. And this tends to want to go back. But so the tongue's straight, and these reeds are pretty popular with both bands, but particularly the bass drone reeds. I'm just refreshing them at the moment now. And also the moisture control system. I have my own moisture control system and chanter moisture control system. So, so I have these products as well.
And did you get involved with pipe bag at all?
I was involved with Valentine pipe bags.
Aye.
So I was involved in helping him at an early stage with him. Because he's not a piper, Craig. So,
Aye.
So I was involved in helping.
Did you help him design?
He pretty much designed it, but we made some alterations, and a lot of the bag is on the shape of my bag at the time, the sheepskin bag that I used to play, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been involved with Craig over the years, but not business-wise, just helping him more, and I'm not in business with him, but you know, helping him, yeah.
Because I got a new set of pipes from McCallum last week, and it's a Bannatyne bag of that, and you know, as I was interested in.
A comfortable bag.
Yeah, excellent, absolutely excellent.
Yeah.
What other products?
Well, there's the bottle trap that we have, which I think the minimum thing anybody should have is a tube or something in their bag to take the moisture or the hot air to the back of the bag, allowing the bag to do its job. So I'm not in favour of a lot of these valves that they put inside the blowpipe if you can't put a tube on it, because I think you must have a tube. You don't want to be blowing straight on top of your reed.
Okay.
You want to take the air. So I have a bottle trap that takes the air along there. Then the moisture control, my moisture control sits on the top of the bag.
Okay.
is directly into the drone, so it's not some weight lying on the bottom of hoses.
Aye.
And mine can easily be taken out, put in. It also has valves, and you
Uh-huh.
can remove the valves or leave the valves in. But one of the big significance I found out, now I started doing summer schools around, particularly in America and Germany. And when you go to the summer schools, people would say, oh, can you put the reeds in my pipes? You put them in, and then I could never get them going properly sometimes. And it was 9 times out of 10 the valves they were playing.
Aye.
I'd have these valves just too tight or not. And I discovered that the elastic valves accentuate the bad blowing.
Aye.
Because actually when they blow hard it opens, and when they ease off it pulls back down. And
Aye. So it's an unsteady.
it makes it even more. So I changed the elastic to a screw,
Uh-huh.
which is easy to adjust.
Okay.
And it regulates and it doesn't fluctuate as much as this elasticated.
Uh-huh.
So I think my valves are pretty good for actually helping poor blowers as opposed to elasticated ones, you know.
So what do you trade under? No.
But trade under Highland Reeds.
It's a Highland Reeds, huh?
HighlandReeds.com,
Aye.
or the reeds themselves are Ballanstone or Bruce Hitchins, you know, but the website's HighlandReeds.com.
Okay. You were honoured by the Queen, BEM and MBE. The BEM, sorry, what did you get first?
The BEM first, yeah.
Right, so how did that come about?
The BEM, because John Major, I think it was, did away with that, but the BEM used to be a lesser award by considered, certainly in the military, it used to be up till warrant officer you got a BEM, and then between warrant officer and colonel you got an MBE, and then above colonel you got no BE.
Okay.
So they sort of structured it that way, and I was a colour sergeant at the time, so and when we went to Northern Ireland, I mentioned earlier, in Belfast, and Pipes and Drums was a fantastic rifle platoon. Part of the thing in Belfast was terrorist recognition and intelligence gathering, and the average intelligence of the guys in the Pipes and Drums was above probably the average soldier. A lot of the guys that joined the Queen's Own would have today gone on to university. They just, in those days, they wanted to be pipers and they joined the army. And the way it was, you know, it's not like today where everybody goes on to university. And so these guys actually had fantastic memories, I think also of learning the tunes.
Yes.
So they were very, very good at intelligence gathering. So when you're out in the streets, you're not just walking around the streets, you also, if you see people, you don't make it known that you've seen them, but you're putting all this together, where these guys are, what they're doing, who they with, where they're mingling, why is this guy in your area? And through some of this intelligence, we realised that some of one of the main bomb makers was in our area, in our terrain, in the Adoyne. And then we also discovered that a house where one of these guys lived, the curtains were normally open and the curtains would be closed. And then they were brewing coffee, strong smell of coffee. Well, they normally brewed this coffee, try and cover up the smell of explosive or fertilizer. And so we reported all this intelligence, and we went into the house with the RUC, and there was a huge bomb about this high, just waiting to be delivered the next day down to Belfast. So we caught 3 terrorists, and we also caught another terrorist next door trying to bring gloves and evidence, and this was all really done through the pipe band. But as I was a non-commissioned platoon commander, so I was the platoon commander, normally the officers, I was awarded the BEM for that, for the whole tour. But really the boys were so successful and so good at their job that it made it possible for I picked up the award. You know.
So who presented that to you?
That was presented by the Duke of Edinburgh.
The Duke of Edinburgh. Whereabouts?
Edinburgh Castle.
Edinburgh Castle. That'd be a nice occasion, eh?
Yes.
Aye, it was very pleasant.
No, that was more of a military occasion.
Yeah.
Well, you know.
Did a wee cup of tea after that
Yes.
And what about the MBE?
Well, the MBE came in 2000, so that was sort of the end of my regular service, if you like. And that is probably recognition of just service to the job, and my 7 years, 8 years, which is unusual to do so long at the castle or in that position. And so that was really recognition to piping, and military piping in particular, that I got that. But the great thing about that for me, that was actually presented by Her Majesty at Holyrood Palace, and that was really nice. The army are quite good about these things. The general sent me his staff car to take us down to Holyrood Palace. You're allowed to invite 3 guests. So my mother, my stepdad, and my wife and myself. So we went in the staff car down to Holyrood Palace. And of course, when the sentries seen the staff car coming, they thought it was the general, so they opened the gates, and I just told the driver to drive on, and everybody else had to park in the back, and we drove up to the front door, you know, and got out and walked in. And it was the day that Sean Connery was getting knighted, got his knighthood. So just by chance, when we went in, my mother and family ended up sitting virtually in the front row. So they got on the front page of all the Hello magazines and all the TV around the world. People phoning up from New Zealand saying, "We're seeing you on TV," you know. So it was really fun, because for my mother it just made her life, I suppose, to go down and meet the Queen, and to be there and do all that, you know.
Wonderful.
And then be on the front page of Hello magazine and all these, you know. So I was really so pleased for her that it was a great occasion. It's it's well done, and it's a good occasion, you know.
So you've had a wonderful piping life, Bruce, eh?
I'm very, very thankful for Donald MacLeod. I think was a very humble man. I was only fortunate enough I did have a couple of lessons off him, but he died too young, of course. But he was a very gracious man. He composed the tune Cabaret Cabra for the regiment, and he played it at his last dinner night down at Claridge's. There's a dinner club down at Claridge's every year. The Could You Can Read dinner club, the Seaforth Islands dinner club, where past and serving officers can go to Claridge's. It's the oldest dinner club in Claridge's, 180 years or something down in London. And Donald used to go down every year from Fort George. They used to take the silver down. Flett was a piper, and also sometimes the silversmith and the officer's mess, depending on his behaviour, between being in the pipe band or having to clean the silver, you know. And Flett came from Flotter, of course. So that tune was composed in the Guards band going down to London to play at one of these dinners.
My goodness, eh?
So,
I know.
Well, that's the train. You know, when you...
And then the wee Highland laddie was the same sort of rhythm, wasn't it?
Yeah, so when you explain to people that, you can feel
Flight
it.
from Flotter, eh?
So, and when Donald played at his last one in '64, he retired, and he played the tune Could You Can Cabaret Cabra, right? Which was played at Alistair's funeral, by the way. He wrote on the back of the card, "The regiment owes me nothing, I owe the regiment everything." And I think that's a sign, you know.
Well, that's a wonderful note to finish on, and thanks very much, Bruce. We could go in here for hours, I'm quite sure, but we've got to stop sometime while we're enjoying ourselves, and thank you very much for your time here for Pipers'Persuasion.
Well,
all the best for the future.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
On a clear day, you can see Moscow just up to the north there. And at the time of the old alliance, Napoleon was invading Russia. In order to overcome Russia, he needed to be through the gates of the Kremlin and take over the whole of Moscow. So he thought of Mons Meg and emailed wee Huey, who was in charge of firing Mons Meg, the big gun, and asked wee Huey if he'd fire the gun towards Moscow and melt down the gates of the Kremlin. So that was okay, it's a grand plan, but what actually happened was wee Huey got drunk and had a domestic with his wife over bottle of whiskey. So that being the case, he wasn't available to get the email to tell him to go ahead, fire Mons Meg, and it never happened. So Moscow was never overtaken by Napoleon. Napoleon had to turn back through all the snow and everything else, and the rest is history. Interestingly, a wee side note to this was that Josephine, Napoleon's wife, that particular year won the Eurovision Song Contest with that famous song, Que Sera, Sera.
Not sure who had the bottle of whiskey there.
Real expert about Mons Meg. Duncan, tell us about Mons Meg.
Mons Meg, funnily enough, it was built in Mons in present-day Belgium. Built in 1449 for Philip the Good, the Duke of Burgundy, and he gave it as a present to King James II. King James II was married to the Duke of Burgundy's niece, so an unusual wedding present, but the real reason behind it was he hoped, and he probably knew, that King James would use this cannon against their mutual enemy, which at the time was England, and it was used. There we go, bang bang.